Imagine a sign warning passersby, "No girls allowed." Most would imagine such a sign hanging on the door of an immature boy's clubhouse, not on the entrance to a prestigious institution of higher education. However, the state-funded Virginia Military Institute, or VMI, adopted just such a male-only admissions policy. The policy was later challenged before the United States Supreme Court in United States v. Virginia. An anonymous female high school student lodged a complaint with the United States Department of Justice about VMI's refusal to accept applications from women. In response, the United States brought suit against Virginia, claiming that VMI's exclusion of women violated the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. The district court ruled in VMI's favor, and on appeal, the Fourth Circuit remanded the case and tasked Virginia with devising a remedy. Virginia's remedy didn't admit women to VMI, but rather created a parallel program designed for women called the Virginia Women's Institute for Leadership. The women's program dispensed with VMI's unique adversative method of training, which utilized near-constant humiliation and pressure to foster loyalty and discipline in new cadets. Instead, the women's program called for a less rigorous and non-military cooperative method. The difference in training was meant to account for perceived differences in learning styles between men and women. The women's program got less funding than the men's program and lacked the prestige and influence enjoyed by male VMI graduates. Nonetheless, the district court approved the plan. A divided Fourth Circuit affirmed, holding that the opportunities offered by the programs were, quote, sufficiently comparable, unquote, to satisfy the Equal Protection Clause. The Supreme Court granted cert. The issue before the United States Supreme Court was whether the admissions policy violated the Equal Protection Clause. The court answered yes, holding that VMI's exclusion of women wasn't substantially related to serve an important governmental objective. Justice Ginsburg, writing for a 7-1 majority, applied a heightened version of intermediate scrutiny, which required an exceedingly persuasive justification for using gender-based classifications to achieve an important governmental objective. In addition, the gender-based classification had to be substantially related to the realization of the stated objective. First, Ginsburg addressed Virginia's argument that securing the educational benefits that flowed from a single-sex education was an important governmental objective that justified VMI's exclusion of women. The policy of admitting males only, argued the Commonwealth, contributed to the important objective of supporting unique forms of education. The court rejected that argument, calling attention to Virginia's long history of resistance to the admission of women to higher education institutions. The historical record indicated that Virginia's interest in a policy of educational variety was actually just an after-the-fact excuse designed to preserve VMI's all-male character. Second, Virginia argued that its admissions policy was substantially related to educational variety because the admission of women to VMI would require drastic accommodations and alterations to the adversative educational method. The method would therefore lose its essential character. The court rejected this argument. Though many women couldn't meet the demanding standards in place at VMI, there were certainly some women who could. Virginia's concerns, Ginsburg noted, mimicked the same unfounded fears that were expressed throughout our history to perpetuate the exclusion of women from public life. Finally, the court addressed the sufficiency of Virginia's proffered remedy, namely the Virginia Women's Institute for Leadership. The women's program was inferior in both educational methods and prestige to VMI. Most importantly, the program had been built on generic and outdated assumptions about the differences between the sexes. Under the Equal Protection Clause, this disparity was unacceptable. Accordingly, the court reversed the judgment and struck down VMI's admissions policy as unconstitutional. Chief Justice Rehnquist concurred in the judgment, but took issue with the majority's reasoning. He lamented that the additional requirement of an exceedingly persuasive justification in the intermediate scrutiny analysis muddied the waters and made the test more difficult to apply. He further suggested that the constitutional violation at hand was the maintenance of an all-male school without a comparable alternative for women, rather than the categorical exclusion of women from VMI. Justice Scalia dissented. He admonished the majority for straying from the usual confines of the intermediate scrutiny test. In his view, the democratic process, not the judicial process, was the appropriate avenue to address VMI's policy, because that process best mediated the tension between evolving attitudes and traditions rooted in history. Due to its careful scrutiny of gender-based classifications, United States v. Virginia remains an important milestone in the constitutional advancement of gender equality.